The Standing Orders Committee looks at the rules of Parliament, and we have a set of rules called the Standing Orders, and every 3 years we review them. We look at the what needs to change, what we get feedback, but the whole process takes quite a while, about the best part of a year. Yeah. From start to end, and at the end of it we have a new set of changes for the rules of the next Parliament.
And those rules, I don't think I really understood before the committee actually. It's about how laws are made in this country and how we hold the government to account, and how we make sure that you, as the public, are able to be properly represented in these processes. So at a time where it feels like our democracy is more important than ever, like this is really interesting, I say geekily, and important work.
And every party in Parliament is part of the Standing Orders Committee. They have a seat at the table, and the committee operates on the basis of making decisions that have overwhelming support. So that's a term that basically means we try to come to a consensus across all of the parties, everyone that's participating, and so we end up having some pretty good debates.
Really, really interesting discussions, and it feels like, to me, it was an incredibly collegial committee, like everyone trying to work in the interests of the public with the different views of how to do it.
And so that probably brings us to submissions, and so we had 69 submitters that forwarded their submissions. I enjoyed reading them all actually. There's a lot to observe and to absorb. And I think the very first submitter that we heard from was the Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Palmer.
That's right. And I think I've got a stack of the submissions in my office that's like about that high. It was quite a lot of content, and really from individual people, people with huge amounts of experience, people without so much, as well as organisations, and ideas from the Green Party suggesting that the bells should be replaced with birdsong. Not possibly such a constitutional issue, to the call for there to be more members of Parliament.
Yes. And so I thought that when we got to oral submissions and hearing from Sir Geoffrey, this was my first time as chair of Standing Orders, so I wasn't too sure how things were going to go, to be honest, but I really enjoyed the collegial nature of the discussion. It was a very open discussion, that very first one. It really set the tone for the rest of the process, I felt, which was really, really good. I got the strong feeling that people were there to listen and to hear everyone's view. Of course, we don't agree on everything, but I do believe that we've come to some really good decisions about the future rules of Parliament.
And maybe in the comments you can see the link to some of those submissions, because it was really, really interesting. People who just want to make our democracy better.
Yeah. I actually hope that even some of the things that we didn't get to take up, that they resurface again, because I think some things take time. Doesn't mean to say they're a bad idea. Actually, I think there's some very good ideas that just haven't quite made its time yet. But I think sometime in the future it might do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so where's this year's one?
Well, this is the final document that will go to Parliament to consider. Quite a few changes. It's quite a thick document with a lot in it, and of course, as I said, one of the major changes is around scrutiny. So, do you want to start off about?
So I think it's about, there was a general feeling that while there's some really good examples of scrutiny, and scrutiny is looking at the detail of what our government or our ministries are doing with the money that they've been given, as well as the government's plans. And that there's some examples of good scrutiny, but it's not consistent. And there's a real feeling that the time pressure in our committees means that actually members of parliament aren't getting to spend the time delving into the detail to make sure that the government, the executive, are doing the best possible job for the community.
So yeah, and it's really important that through this process we strengthen the ability of the select committees to do that body of work, because it's a really important. And so we've done a couple of things to create that space. One of them is to shorten first reading of bills.
That's right, because we wanted more time to be able to focus on the scrutiny, because it's so important in terms of public confidence in the system. But MPs didn't want to trade off or spend less time in their communities connecting with you, the public. So it was, we had to find a way to create more time to be able to do the scrutiny work. So we shortened first readings.
Yeah, and we thought that was okay because first readings typically will go to a select committee, and at the select committee, that's where the main body of work and scrutiny of that bill happens. And so reducing that by half creates, in our opinion, around about 2 weeks of time that can be spent on specifically scrutiny of the executive.
So it's a whole new innovation. It feels, I'm quite excited about it, where Parliament will now have 2 weeks a year dedicated to scrutiny. And it will mean that you as a public will know ahead of time when we're going to be doing that. And the media will also know, so they'll be able to pay attention. And there'll be some certain agencies will be that every committee will pick some agencies every year where they'll spend 3 hours really getting into some of the detail of asking questions about their plans and what they're doing.
Some of the bigger ministries and departments, they might have several parts to it, and so organised by themes for that entity we thought was a really good idea. But before we get to that bit, there's another step in the process. And that is select committees before the first budget in the next term must create a plan. A plan for the whole term that will set out which departments, which ministries that they want to examine through the scrutiny week process, and that does a couple of things. It means the staff will know in advance, and the ministries and the departments and everything, they'll know in advance when they're up basically for that process. And I think that's a really good thing, that staff can go ahead and just organise them. It also gives the opportunity for select committees to review that each year, and things might change. They might develop different priorities, so that's still in the mix as well.
And hopefully, I think those plans will be public, so that so you'll all know when those weeks are going to be and what agencies we're going to be interrogating and what ministers. So that gives you as the public an opportunity as well, or people who may engage with those agencies, to be in contact with the members on that select committee ahead of time with questions you would want us to be asking or exploring with those agencies. So hopefully it will create more of an engagement about the importance of this. And I've got to say, I don't think any of this is anti a government, because delivering on plans is a complex and difficult piece of work, and the more the public can be engaged in giving us the feedback on how it's actually going on the ground, and to be able to give that feedback to the agencies and the ministers, I think the better it will work for all of us.
Yeah, and there's actually some smaller entities that will still be reviewed as well, because alongside of Scrutiny Week, we will have in-depth reviews. And so that work can be carried out anytime during the year by a select committee deciding that they want that sort of briefing from one of the entities, probably be along the lines of what we're traditionally used to, you know, around 1 hour, because some of these entities are quite small and probably don't need the amount of scrutiny that others would want.
That's right. And that can still shift if an issue comes up relating to one of those agencies where there's public concern, and we can, the committees will be able to adapt.
Just try and adapt in real time, you know, despite what the plan might say, they might have something may come up and they decide, well, we need to have a briefing on that. So I think that's, we've gotten it to a really good place. I really think it will work, and I think at the next thinking forward, you know, it's something that we really will be able to fine tune further once we've actually experienced the process.
Yeah, I mean, partly at one time we were considering the idea of 6 hours for an agency. Personally, I was quite keen on that, and breaking it down into particular themes, being able to look at kind of the future and interaction with other agencies, community. Wasn't really very realistic in terms of people's time and the trade-off. So I think this is a really good start, and there is also quite clear direction around wanting committees to encourage feedback on how agencies are working with other agencies as well as their long-term vision, which I think is really important.
Yeah, because there are inter-agency policies that would, you know, be really great to get those insights of how they're working together and achieving the ultimate goal of that policy.
That's right, because silos are not working for us, and this is an attempt to try and help our Parliament, I guess, recognise the importance of the cross-government work.
During the process of the Standing Orders Committee, we actually called for additional submissions because a matter arose in the House around the entrenchment of legislation, and we decided that it was important enough for us to actually ask for submission and to have a discussion around whether or not there should be some changes to how entrenchment is handled.
And so the new standing orders will have some guidance for how Parliament deals with issues of entrenchment. The basic finding of was setting out this process and ensuring, I think one of the key points really is that select committees must consider any proposal for entrenchment. It can't be introduced in the debate in the House, and that it should still be only relating to important constitutional matters and continue to be rare. Obviously there's debate about what is an important constitutional matter.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, one of the other issues was around whether or not it should be allowed during an urgency process. So this effectively takes that option out, because if it was raised during urgency, it would have to be recommitted back to a select committee. So that gives that added level of protection and ability for the public to have their say on it. So I think that's probably the underlying feature, that if there is an entrenchment proposal, the public get to have their say on it. And in a way, it's for the whole of Parliament and the New Zealand public to decide what is an important constitutional matter we all have different ideas about that, but most people would agree that the parliamentary term would be an important constitutional matter. So a 3-year term, which is entrenched, would continue to be so, and any one wanting to change that would have to go through that process.
That's right. And I do think that the point we got to was a really good one, because we want public ownership of the way we organise, the fundamental way that we organise our democracy, and requiring it to go to select committee is a way of ensuring that public ownership, I think.
So one of the submissions, actually might have been more than one submission, but the one in particular was very particular about the changes that should be made around the language that we use in Parliament. So there is some very oldish language that you probably won't hear anywhere else except for in Parliament.
Yeah.
People don't usually use the word forthwith.
I just think it's hilarious.
Yeah. And so the committee discussed that, and actually the House, we've already changed from using the term, so the House will consider this forthwith, to the House will consider this immediately, which is a word that's more common around New Zealand, actually.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we didn't get very far. I think there is a kind of a sense that sometimes the language that we use in this place is a barrier for people understanding what's going on in the public, but also for new MPs as well. I remember coming in here and there were certain times where I was like, what? Particularly in the committee stages of debates, where there's the closure motion and that the question be now put. Yeah. And it took me quite a while to work out what on earth we were talking about. Yeah. And so now that will be changed to the debate on this question now close. A little bit easier to follow.
Yeah. And even in the vote, you know, the question put to the committee might be, the question is that part 1 stand part. Well, who in New Zealand actually speaks like that, and what does that actually mean? Yeah. Well, turns out it means that that part will be part of the legislation. So why not say that? Exactly.
I think it's a bit of a relief, actually, just to get these 3 changes. And I look forward to a far more comprehensible debate.
I think there needs to be some ongoing changes in the language that we use so that it's more accessible for people watching, and that they understand that, well, actually, I don't understand what that actually means. Actually, probably most MPs, when we come here, what does that actually mean? I don't know. And then you go and ask someone, and then...
I think that this part stand apart, the Standing Orders Committee had a discussion where I think most of us learnt for the first time what that meant.
Yes.
After years of being here.
And voting on it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that was one of the more interesting and discussions, and I think we had some other suggestions that probably won't fly, but...
but it's progress.
Yeah.
So the committee also decided to recommend that other inquiries were held to explore issues that we weren't able to resolve in a lot more depth. So one of the ones that I'm particularly excited about is proposing an inquiry into public finance performance reporting. Now, I know that may not be immediately exciting to people, but it genuinely is incredibly important and exciting, because it's consideration about how our government agencies, the information they're giving us to be able to find out whether our money is actually making a difference like that our government agencies are making the difference that we want them to make. And we've been having an increasing number of reports telling us that actually the information we're getting is not telling us the difference we're making. And so as an example, we tend to report on expenditure and programs, not outcomes. And so this is, we need to know, are we improving the quality of water in our country? Not how many people have gone out and tested water in this area, how much money has gone into pipes. Those things actually, in the scheme of things, are only points that should be on the way to telling us whether we're improving our water quality.
Yeah, it's like the difference between counting outputs and looking at outcomes.
Yeah.
You know, and whether counting up a set of activities actually amounts to resolving the issue. And so I think the inquiry into it needs to establish how that can be done, and makes, well, I actually think there needs to be a willingness to do it as well. Yeah,
and it's also about looking at the fact that many issues that are of real public concern, for example, education of our students, actually that our system is set up where we interrogate the policies and practices of our schools and our education system, but housing policy, disability support service provision, the status of te reo Māori, those things have an impact on educational outcomes, but our system doesn't enable us to look at them, and so we're just not really being effective at the moment.
Yeah, so looking forward to the outcome of that. There is another one, and that is to establish an inquiry into international treaties. Not really my area of expertise, but I do understand that when our government enters into arrangements overseas, quite often those treaties have to be ratified by the Parliament. And so it's looking at how we can do that better, how that we, you know, how they're examined by a select committee, and there have been over time concerns around what we've entered into and what the Parliament's almost been obliged to pass through the House.
And so there was a great submission from Professor Jane Kelsey on this topic, and I think, and pointing out that so our government signs them and it gets ratified by Parliament, but with no ability to actually scrutinise the detail along the way, and that what we used to be trade agreements just used to be about trade. Now they are also about provision of public services and environment, a whole lot of things that actually, her concern was that when they're signing up, they're binding future parliaments. So our parliament should have an increased role. So that's a debating point, and I think it's fantastic that the committee will be doing that.
Yeah, and got full support around the table for that to happen, because I think we all shared, or members all shared that, and recognised there was an issue that needed to be discussed and resolved.
The next stage for this will be the debate in Parliament that you, by the time this comes out, you'll be able to go back and look at, where one rep from every party gets to talk about the process and the details of it, so you might find out even a little bit more information.
Yeah. Kia ora, that's the Standing Orders Select Committee's work, producing the changes and the report to Parliament. So I hope that's been enlightening to you all. We certainly enjoyed the process. It's an important part of the constitutional arrangements of our country. Nō reira, tēnā rā tātou katoa.